we are competing in, we are repeating in, we are believing in. It's time for us to shift our mind from best in the world to best for the world. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. It creates a new world to mind a shift, intentionality, perceptuality, conceptuality. We are choosing to shift our mind to best for the world, best for our world. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional.
Welcome to FiDE, the Foundation for Intentional Decisions, and to the latest episode, number 9 already, about language. My name is Jens Rinnelt, and with me in the studio, as always, my dear co-host, Stella Nordal.
Thank you, Jens. Great to be here again, and welcome everyone. We have had a lot of interesting dialogues here. This is the 9th?
The 9th program, yes.
Program. Okay, so we have explored life in many aspects, I would say, and starting out with ideas of history concerning choices, and then we moved into a lot of ideas concerning fundamental assumptions and guiding principles, and we've also dug into choices as a phenomena itself, and consciousness, of course, is closely related to that. And today we're going to talk about language. That's right.
Yes, exploring language. And I would like to start actually with a experiment of demonstrating the power of language. And Stellan, can you answer the question, who are you?
What a wonderful question. Of course, there are easy ways to answer that. I guess a lot of people relate to what they do. Maybe functions they have, like a parent or whatever it could be, husband, wife. But as you get a little bit more, you don't need to get philosophical, you actually need to get aware of yourself to realize that that's a tricky question. Because as I answer it, I also define myself. So at the same time I answer a question, I also define myself. I am ... and you can fill in that blank space with whatever you choose. So who? That's Can I answer it? Do I want to answer it? In which way do I want to answer it? Is it a question that is meant to really explore who I am, or is it just a question of you want to have a relation in some way, and you want to start the relation with that question? I don't know. Who? I would say it creates. The language creates.
Yeah, and that's, I think you answered on point. It's like there are different ways of how you can look at it, and this is actually what I wanted to test here is where is our focus. We talked about the 4 loops already, and you can define yourself, as you said, in what am I doing. You know, right now we can say we are the hosts, or we're hosting a...
That's the first loop.
Yeah, we're hosting a radio show. Then how do we do it? Well, right now we're doing it in your studio here, and do it with the technology that we have available. Then there's a why of we do it, and as you said, there are different ways on how you relate to it and how you can look at it, and it's a powerful question, and I can only invite everyone to test it out once in a while and ask people this kind of question, and you will see where more or less their focus is in this moment. As you already said, it cannot, the definition of that can also change within the contexts. So, for example, if I go home tonight, I will be a boyfriend. I will be a cat owner. There are different roles that I
You
fill.
almost said a cat. That was close. Cat owner is as close you get to being a cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of layers, of course, and also either you describe or you create. And I guess a lot of us, maybe at least I have been brought up in a thought world or a worldview, saying to me that it's a description of something. The story is a history instead of something you write or conduct or whatever you do.
Mm.
But I believe today that is just half of it. So,
Yeah, it's also interesting that you mentioned this, because, as you say, language is also such a powerful way for us humans to describe abstract concepts to other people, to elaborate on ideas that we have. And let's be honest, these are mostly thoughts, concepts that are abstract and that are metaphysical in itself. So we're not talking about, can I describe this table for you, and I can say there are squares on it and so on. I mean, I can still do it, but we can agree like there is a certain truth in it, or we can agree at least on what are the colors are, even if we have maybe different perspectives. You sit on this side of the table, I sit on the other side. But what I want to get is how can we use language as creating? And as you said, this is
yeah, and also realize what language really is. I mean, it's a way of communicating and to be able to have a conversation or create something together. And of course, we have to have conventions of that language. So what is, for instance, a red strawberry? So we have a clear view of what a red strawberry is. But the interesting thing is that a red strawberry is actually everything but red. So the convention of using the name red strawberry is not actually describing what it is. It's more a convention to be able to know to have a common understanding of a red strawberry. But the thing is, if you look physically to it, it's actually everything but red. And that is interesting in itself. So there are conventions in the language which makes us able to use the language. So being aware of that means that all words we have create. Every time we want to describe, it's also creating. So who are you, Jens? Who are you?
Yeah, you could say I have a complex relationship with life, with myself and my environment.
That's great. So I would say that language is actually the how. If we look at how we as humans manifest things, the language is what takes things from thoughts to things. The language is what makes our ideas, our fantasies, our dreams come into reality. I mean, the dreams are real. I would say anyone who have had a nightmare wouldn't say anything else than it's real. But then you wake up and you realize that it's not yet manifested. So it's maybe good to have that ability to see that it was a dream, but the dream itself was real. So when I'm talking about reality, it's for me, at least, it's what I can't say is anything else than real. That's my interpretation and definition of reality. And at the same time, I also know that there are other ways to look at it, where you define reality as something that is measurable or something that you can touch upon or see at least. Again, that doesn't say that it's not real, but maybe there are more things that are real. And what do we then create with the language? What does words say? What are words? And if we look into a biblical interpretation, that is actually where everything starts. First, there was the word.
I think you mentioned an interesting aspect, because how can we use language really to make something seen that has not been manifested yet or has no physical form? And I'm thinking here of an example that we both have been part of, and that is the strategy conference that we had with Emprogage, the company that we both own together. And a couple of weeks ago, we had basically one of these strategy sessions. So we come together, we presented the financial results of the last year, and we've reflected on what we have learned as a whole company in the past year. But we also set intentions forward, what we are going to co-create, or what we would like to co-create in the future. So you could say on that level, it's quite an ordinary meeting where knowledge is exchanged. But I think we also had a very interesting reflection at the end of this meeting, where we asked, so what does it all mean now to everybody who is present there? And I think that's where it really went interesting, because a lot of people said, well, this company has been existing for 2 years now, and a lot of people expressed that this is a point in time where there's some change in energy. We have been focusing a lot in these 2 years maybe on ourselves, on how we work, defining how things are, setting up structures, explaining these structures to everybody, and then kind of, finding a common language that everybody can relate to. But now it seems like this turns more towards, okay, now we are almost all on the same page, we have the same language and understanding.
It's easier to write the book then.
Yeah, and now we can start writing the book, so to say, and fill these pages with co-creations and with things that are, that we want to manifest.
Can you create something without the words?
Create something without words.
I've been thinking a lot of this. Last year there was an article in the newspapers saying that they found a new language.
Mm.
It was linguists at the University of Lund here in Sweden that have found a new language. And the first thing I'm thinking of is like, okay, was there like a new people that were found? No anthropologists have found those people before. It was I think somewhere in Indonesia or out in, I don't really remember exactly. But this was the first time that we realized that this was a new language, but not formally known language in the Western world. It's called Yedek, and Yedek was spoken by 250 people or something, persons. And in the language of Yedek, there were no words for, what do you say, violence between people. There were no words to describe interrelated violence.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean, really?
Yeah, that's also interesting. What do you use the words for as describing a concept? Maybe they didn't have a concept for these things.
No, there were no violence in between the people.
Yeah, exactly.
So first of all, one could say that there was no need to describe it. So by that, there were no words. But from my point of view, that's just half the story. The rest of the story is that you can't actually create that because you don't have words to conceptualize it. So you don't have words for describing it, as there are no concept that you have to describe. But you can't create it if you don't have the words. Then you have to have like a fantasy with creating those words, more or less.
And this is part of what I wanted to highlight with my example. Is like, how do you interpret a situation? How do you use words to abstract meaning out of a situation? And as you said, there lies so much power in this, and we have seen this also in the past weeks in framing concepts that helps us actually to describe new situations, describe how we look at certain things from a certain perspective. We, for example, created the phrase Corona opportunities. And a lot of people speak about a crisis and a crisis moment, and of course you can talk about the value of a crisis, but I mean you can also look at it already from a very positive connotation point of view, saying, well, the situation we are facing is a situation with a lot of opportunities.
Definitely, and by using that terminology, you also create them. So this is also from this language of Yiddish. When they studied the language, they also studied the people there, and the thing was in this context was that, or in this language and in this community, that the parents, they encouraged their children not to compete. Which is also in itself extremely interesting. I don't know if it was interconnected to the previous thing I said, but just by adding that idea was for me a revelation, more or less, that okay, what happens if we don't take for granted things as competition, for instance? What if we take something else for granted, and also encourage our children to focus on specific phenomena that we're interested in? What happens if we, with our language, say to people, we value that you answer the question, who am I? In terms of not physical doings, but in terms of what do you want to be? What life do you want to have? What do you want to stand for? What are your values? What do you want to bring to the world? How do you want to leave this planet, and what do you want to bring to next coming generations?
These are really powerful questions, I believe. Yeah.
That is a totally different phrasing. Instead of what do you want to work with, what do you want to study?
Yeah, and it's opening up to more possibilities, more opportunities.
On one hand, yes. On the other hand, it also puts the choice into your hands. How do I want to frame myself? I mean, framing is important in many. That creates meaning. But are those frames enabling stuff, or are they limiting stuff?
Yeah.
I can take as an example. I had, that is exactly how this is. Every word creates. If we, the perception itself creates reality, right? You're following that? Okay. So every word is then creating something, and you have followed this program series of FiDE programs. You heard my story in one of the first episodes, and very short for you who haven't followed it. I was first being a parent in 2005 when my firstborn daughter was born. A year later she died, and the year after that my first son was born. And in that time period a lot of things happened. I often say when you choose openness and at the same time you have a lot of friction, there is an opportunity of learning. So there was a lot of things going on. A lot of things happened, and a lot of learning came into my life. And I was often presented as with acceptance. I should accept, more or less, meaning resignation. You should accept, resignate, give up. Do you understand? So I don't know what the word is in English, but as soon as I heard acceptance, it turned everything up and down. I didn't want to go close to acceptance, because I believe that acceptance was presented in terms of resignation, to resign, to give up. Things are, or a certain thing is, or things are, end, period, dot. And then I came out after those in this time period into the, we can call it so-called normal life, where people, everything had, during the time I was away from the world, it was still going on. So very strange feeling, and a lot of people at this time, it was in 2006, 2007, spoke about mindfulness and yoga, stuff like that, which was really on rise, and very often they talked in terms of acceptance, and I was like, okay, a lot of things they got right, but this one they got wrong. But then as time passed, I realized that if I was presented with acceptance as something is. It was like wooden stock that you more or less hit with your head. I realized that those people used it as in another term, in another way. It was more like, how can I say it, almost like the serenity prayer in the Christianity, where you know where some things are possible and some things are not possible, and you should be wise enough to understand what is what. And then I realized that was one side of it. But at that point, where something was presented as possible or impossible, on the other side of it, I could also get to choose. It was more like something I could turn to impossible or possible, depending on how I looked at it. And then I realized that there was also another with an even higher consciousness level. I could actually say that acceptance didn't say anything how things was. Maybe how they were, but nothing what they could be. And then it turned this wooden log into something where I could, a stepping stone to something new. And the same word actually had 4 different meanings. First meaning was acceptance equals things are. End of story. Next one, there is something that could be seen as possible and something that could be seen as impossible, and you should be wise enough to know the difference. And the third version of it was possible, impossible, and you get to choose. And the fourth one was, it doesn't say anything about what is. It maybe said something of what was, but nothing of what can be.
That's really interesting of how you link one, you can say, a wording of a phenomenon that is explained in different, basically based on the 4 loops in some way. And how this interpretation of the same word changes depending on, as you said, how you look at it, basically.
If we use the tree metaphor and we use the intentional decision model, it would be like in physical me, things are. End of story. In formal we, there is some kind of a rational, analytical way of thinking of impossible, possible, and the only wisdom you can have is to know which is which. And then in creative together, you can actually create, so you can choose what is possible and impossible on different levels, depending on your internal resources, maybe, I don't know. And then in Conscious United, you have the possibility to choose freely, and you can define.
It's also interesting because the word in itself, impossible, already says, I think there's a realm of possibilities in there. And probably outside of this realm, there's even more opportunities or possibilities that we are not even aware of, or I guess while saying this, you become aware of it.
As soon as you have said impossible, it's actually at least a little bit possible. And the interesting thing is, I don't know if you've seen this meme, but impossible actually says I'm possible. I love that meme. What a wonderful meme. And a lot of words change as you go through this idea of first of all we have the separation, and then you have some kind of a relation, and then you actually you see that everything is a system, and if we use again, I think we have showed this before, but if you use intentional decision and the tree metaphor, you can also talk about, for instance, in any area, of course, you can talk about different words. If we go for sustainability as a word, sustainability is in silos. If we look at physical me, they are not even related, so they're both separated and non-related, and one silo doesn't affect the other one. And profit is probably the most interesting silo. And then we have the formal we, where we at least realize that there are more than one type of sustainability. There are different separated areas, but they are not related. and then you come integrate it together where you realize they are related in some way, and they have some kind of interconnection, which is the sustainability connection then. And then you realize in Conscious United that everything is a system. So it's if those sustainabilities, the economical, the environmental, and the social, if they are seen as lenses, this is where all lenses are in one line.
Yeah, you gave now some examples of how a word changes its meaning depending on your worldview. Is there also the other possibility that the same meaning has different words?
Yeah, I would say, and also words that are more or less extremely useful in one worldview, but in another they are like obsolete. we can take the one we already mentioned about competition. So competition is really, it's more or less a truth. It's something that is in terms of physical me and formal we. So it's more or less a universal law. When we look at the nature, we even defined evolution in terms of competition. It says the genes are what do you call it? Selfish. So the selfish genes. An idea presented because of the separation, I would say. And today, when we look at the world with another pair of glasses, or with new eyes, or whatever you call it, you can see that there are films from both nature and other producers, BBC and so on, and they see other things. They see where what's previous, the competition was the main rule. The main rule is now together, and the previous main rule is like something that is extraordinary. It's not the ordinary. The ordinary is together.
And it's interesting if you look, for example, the example I'm thinking of here is like a shark eating a smaller fish, and you could say, well, that's how the shark survives its role as the strongest and survival, and this is how evolution works. But from another perspective, couldn't you also say that both are playing their role in a bigger picture? I mean, the shark can only survive if there are smaller fish to be eaten, and then maybe the smaller fish also benefits from things the shark does. Codependence, exactly. So, and if you would take out one of these elements of the system, the whole system would be changed.
Yeah, probably collapse in some sense, or a radical change. We know that from ecosystem thinking that if we take away parts that seem to be in the margins, they're not in the margins. They're actually really part of, not only part of the system, they are crucial for the system. So it's and I believe that if we take examples here, there are many examples. There were last year. There was also another interesting scientific article in the newspaper saying that it was like an ant scientist. I don't know if I mentioned this before.
No,
I think okay. Ant scientist. He studied some kind of ants. I don't remember the name of them. There were part of their ecosystem was that they were fighting termites, which is a bigger ant, I guess, and on the fields there were a lot of injured ants, and what he saw was that their friends and relatives, or whatever it was, like the rest of the ants, they went out on the battlefield and they brought back their wounded fellows, and then they licked their injuries. And there was a remarkable recovery. So he took everything into the lab, and then he realized that those ants who were left out on the battlefield, only 10% survived. but the ones that they brought into their like what do you call it, and
Yeah.
yeah, whatever name of it
Yeah,
is.
housing.
Housing. Yeah, the ants housing. Yeah, 80% survived. So, in terms of selfish gene, this can't really be explained. It's actually more or less the opposite of it. And yet, this is the language. So this scientist tried really hard to find a way to describe this phenomena from a selfish gene perspective, saying that, yeah, but maybe on 3 or 4 generations they could really be surviving better or more fit than the rest of the ants. And so the language is limiting us by default, actually, because it's only giving us the conceptuality or perception that the words themselves bring to it. That's interesting.
So what you're implying here, is, at least what I'm understanding, is that we need to have a new language. And I mean, we have seen this in the program quite ourselves, that we struggle sometimes to find wording that tries to actually pinpoint exactly what we want to address. But because we don't have the right wording for it, it was kind of challenging to get our ideas across, or to fully explain the intention that we have.
We can use the word empathy, which is one of the dimensions in intentional decisions. Empathy, as far as the Western society, at least 10 years ago, when this model was really new, even if it still is new on the market, so to say, it was more or less not known by many people. At that point, empathy was seen as the ability to feel someone else's pain. So it's connected to suffering. So if you suffered, I could understand your suffering. That was empathy. And it was almost like it was something that was bad, because if you used empathy in that context, you actually felt the same feelings. So how can we then redefine empathy? Because in this context, if we go, for instance, if the other direction of that dimension is sympathy, well, sympathy could look like empathy. For instance, you see, for instance, a beggar when you come out from the grocery shop or grocery store, and what do you do then? Of course, you can choose to give some money or not. But what is the greatest gift you can then give? That will probably be to see this person in another context. To see how this person could thrive in another context.
Instead, you wouldn't see something as it is, but as it could be, or as
Definitely.
you, not only as it could be, but as you put someone else just in a different context.
Yes, and of course I wouldn't say it's not right to give money, because it could be, but what you really do is that you cementize the context that person is already in.
So basically strengthen the position the person is in,
Yes,
by
yes,
amplifying this instead of creating. This is also this is really interesting, because I mean, who could argue with giving money or maybe even food to such a person is the right thing to do? But on another level, what does it really do is it amplifies and re-strengthens, how can I say this? You know, it encourages basically the situation the person is in and how I look at that person. What would be the best? Not the best. What would be another thing to do is maybe I can have a company and then take the person and say, well, do you want to, work? Do you want to, I can give you a job. I can give you something that brings you out of the situation.
Or
that
maybe
you're
you can
in.
ask, is there something we can do together?
Yeah.
Is there something we can do together to bring you from this context into a new context? Of course, that could be hard to answer. I really believe that because we also cementize our own behaviors and our own habits, and a habit is actually a cementized behavior. So, of course, that becomes your paradigm. You are a beggar, and what do you define yourself? I am dot 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 whatever you fill that empty space with. Of course, that is not the choice of many to say I'm a beggar. Not many of those beggars would say that's what I wanted from life. So let's redefine then empathy and see how can we use empathy to see someone in another context. And that someone could be yourself. So empathy could actually be the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and that someone else could be a future you.
Huh. And then
That's stretching empathy into a new realm of possibilities.
It's really interesting how language creates opportunities and
And limits.
Of course it also frames, but I mean, what doesn't?
So, I mean, some of the words I would say we have today need some kind of an update, but we also need new words. And some of the words we use are obsolete when we move into creative mode and into the direction of best for the world. So we can take another example, for instance, if we take, I mean, we have results. That's important. I mean, everything we do creates a result. But what if we limit the results to only what is measurable? Then we value only what is measurable. Okay, so how can we value something else? We can take the word success. What is success? If we have competition, success to win. You have to win to be successful, right? And in that language, in that worldview, every winner needs at least one loser. So winning and losing becomes, two ways in the same balance. So you can't have both at the same time. Either this or this. So that's a definition then of success. But what if success equals what I say is congruent to what I do? So saying and doing, when that is congruent, I am successful. Is that a relevant definition? Yes, it is. At the same time, it also includes the previous definition of it. So a part of that would be saying I'm winning, and doing that will be successful. But that could be just one definition of it. You can actually have a lot of them if you have what I say and what I do is congruent.
I mean, this is one of the main stories that we talk about when we talk about the paradigm shift from being best in the world, being, as you said, winning over somebody else, or transforming to becoming actually or being best for the world. And that is probably, as you said, a different definition of success. Can you explain for me what is the thinking behind this? Why is this, why do I assume that I have to be best in the world to make actually a contribution?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't say that this is the only reason behind it, but I believe that when the only way to look at evolution is selfish gene, we have it then coded into the language. The next one would be, what are we presented? What kind of a worldview are we presented? And this I think we talked about in one of the first programs when we talked about the continuum concept. When we spoke about values, we can also use language. And the continuum concept by Lidloff was, first part of life you get it more or less by the breast milk. So you're grown into a thought model, a worldview, a paradigm. And in the second part of your life, you get experiences and you almost drag them to yourself that are amplifying and establishing that worldview or language or whatever we call it, belief system. And then in the last part of your life, you do everything you can to defend it. So I would say looking into a newborn's eyes doesn't say competition. That's not the language of a newborn human or any any newborn creature.
So it's again what we are training
I believe so, yeah.
newborns to
Yeah.
become accustomed to.
Yeah, both train them and also thought models or belief systems that are presented. Maybe we're not even aware of it. We do it unconsciously, or even more specific, subconsciously. We have like habits, and I would say a lot of the evolution is habitual. So if we're presented such a worldview and it's valued high, and with practices over and over again, it takes a lot to break that. We can call it rule or truth. I'm not saying that this is the only explanation. I believe, but I believe it's a very large part of it, I guess.
And then when you are speaking about best for the world, you have, as you probably already assume now, a different worldview and then different assumptions about the world, and
for me
more
it's a
focus perhaps on collaboration, on working together.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, best for the world, first of all, you have to realize it's different for different people, so it varies. And the second interesting thing is that there is a common denominator, I guess, and what we have found in intentional decision. I'm not saying this is the only truth, but I would say it's quite interesting when we realize that empathy over sympathy, proactivity before reactivity, and engagement over attendance means that we're moving in the direction of best for the world. So best for the world is not a destination, it's more or less a direction. So
Yeah, and as you said, this could look different to different people, but this is also something interesting I realize is like, from a formal we perspective, you can talk about, for example, what is truth, and you could say truth is what we agree upon in this room. So if we say, well, the table is green, then this is our truth. But on another level, and then that is where I would say this is more the conscious united, is also linking back to the idea that we need to have an ethical framework. Like if we take the world, the planet, as the, how can I say it, like the first principle that we need to focus on, then it doesn't really matter what we agree as the truth, but there is some other entity that defines what we should be focusing on.
Yeah, we're struggling right now as a world with those issues, and I believe the best we have come up with is the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm very thankful for the people behind this work, that we have actually been able to unite behind them in some way at least. And again, there are goals. So what I'm thinking of here is that what happens if we take those goals and we put them as fundament for our decisions. We say that they are not goals any longer, they are from where we work from. So we're standing them. Instead of having them in front of us, we're standing at them and saying, okay, this is the way everything has to work. What happens then?
Yeah, if you use them as design criteria.
Yeah, design criteria for putting up an organization, setting up a business model, creating a societal system or whatever, life. And we have had those, and a lot of thought systems and belief systems have those principles within themselves. But in the Western world, or in the thought system that we are living, which I believe is also right now, or has been at least, the role model for societies, is has a total lack of that understanding, and doesn't connect to values that are not physically seen and measurable in terms of length, width, height, time, space.
It's also interesting to reflect upon is that the most dominant worldview might not be the best worldview for the world. Just because I don't know, someone speaks up in a meeting, is always the loudest person in the room, doesn't make it the right, thing to say or to do. There might be different perspectives, and I mean, you probably have also a lot of experiences where you talk about these things, but you realize, like, people in the room can't even grasp it, or they are so much into their own worldview that they can't even see something that is outside of it.
Yeah, that's
And I
right.
mean, we spoke about my own experience where I realized, well, I'm in a work environment that doesn't even allow really for own contribution. Or when I did it, then I realized, well, the questions I asked, they were not really appreciated there. And well, that is okay in some degree, but I also realized that at this point I don't have to, or I don't want to be in this environment anymore, because I can't change anything in it, and I'm also not fully appreciated there. So if I would stay there, it will probably over time make me very depressive.
Yeah, and then you have to find a language which creates a new world for you, a new context, a new working environment, a new life, a new family, or whatever it is that you are interested in to have, or to be in, or to live in.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to get at is here that sometimes there are experiences that are interpreted in such a way that you can realize, well, I totally have a different worldview than someone else, and then I found it at least challenging up to this point to have a dialogue with people that have a different worldview, because in some way we can't even grasp the fundamental assumptions of the other person.
No, that's right, and you're there to actually have. We can take some new words then, words that are used in terms of conversations and communication, and one of them is discussion. Let's have a discussion on that. That's very often something you say without reflecting on what does discussion mean. Discussion means it's to take apart. It's also used when you I don't know what the English word, but in Swedish, if you take apart a dead animal, you use the same words as dissekera. I don't know what the dissect. Yeah, that's the same first part of the word. So dissect and discussion, it's take apart. So, and then you have debate. It's from the French débattre, which means, I don't know how to pronounce it in French, but that means to take your arguments and knock in the other person's head. And then we have dialogue, which means a lot of people think dia is two. No, that's duo. So duologue is between you and I here, and dialogue is when we are more people, or two, of course, where dialogue means to understand the other person's argument. So if we put them into this framework, I would say discuss will be formal we maybe. Debate is where you go to rational me, or physical me. And dialogue needs a way of seeing more values, and an empathic way of talking and listening.
It requires a lot of being curious, I guess, asking questions and really wanting to know the answer, and not just asking to prove a point, or to follow up with, but here's my point of view.
Question to question.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. And in Sweden, the last election we had there was very often the last debate is between the leaders of the parties the night before the election. This time it was not only called the debate. You know what it's called? Duel.
A duel.
Yeah, you know, where you shoot down the other one. So, and I would say, if you ask me, I believe in finding ways that are not putting us in opposition. So, and choose both and over either or.
That's a good approach. It's I think comes a little bit from this improv theater, where you can actually test this when next time you're in a meeting, try to say yes to whatever has been said before, and in order to build up on what has been said, because
Instead
so
of
many
saying
times
but or
yeah, exactly. I mean, I do it also a lot of times that I say, yeah, I some way agree, but here's my perspective.
But it's an interesting connector, because it erases what was said before. So if I say you have a nice look, but then I erase what was just said. So but works like that. Instead I say you have a nice look and a nice shirt.
And thank you for that, Stella.
Yeah. and what I'm saying here is that words create, and those short in between words like but and or either or whatever it is that connects stuff, they are probably more creating stuff than we probably realize.
Yeah, and it's interesting how to use really language, and I wanted to have another aspect that builds up on this sometimes challenging way of explaining the world to well, not explaining the world, but of trying to understand how do I make sense of the world and how does someone else make sense of the world, and why is it so difficult to find a common understanding, or why it sometimes feels that really people are in opposition to each other, and their argumentation also can't come together because they are speaking from so different worldviews that you're basically stuck in a discussion.
Yeah, but it could be that they're from different worldviews, because all of our are. We all have our own worldview, but we are at least facing each other. What if we just turn around on the chairs and look in the other direction? Try it out and see how much of the dialogue is there when I talk in another direction. If I talk totally in opposite of your, then I can't even see you. I can't. I mean, I don't even know how your face looks like right now.
So there's a different way.
Shall we turn it back because it feels a little bit odd?
Yeah, but I mean, this is also interesting because we not only communicate then with our language, but we also take in body language, for example. This is how we make sense of, or how do you react to something that I say, how I can build up on that.
The context itself.
The context itself.
We're in a library.
And which is also interesting. This is one of the parts we touched upon in one of the earlier programs, is where we said in the normal linear model, the interaction between two people happens in the behavior. So you could also say, well, language is one way of behaving, of expressing ideas. But what if, could it also be that there is, the question basically that I have is, could we interact in a way without using language?
Is that a question? Or is it like
maybe it's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, okay. So okay, then you know the answer then.
Because I believe that there are different ways of how we can communicate and make sense of the world that don't require really language. So for example, as we said, we are part of both of this dialogue, and if we would continue this dialogue with the backs towards each other, I don't have any sense of how you react.
Do you remember, Jens, a couple of programs, episodes before, I don't know exactly what was the topic of it, but this was the one with the pen. You remember what you told me afterwards? I don't know if you said it in the program, but afterwards you told me something. Do you want to share it, or shall I?
You probably know best.
Yeah, you said something like, I don't know exactly what you meant, but you said something like, I knew that this was coming without you saying it.
Exactly. This is
and
what
you never seen me doing this, I guess, because that's not the ordinary. I have that in some
no, we don't do that in the afternoons.
No,
when we
no.
hang out together.
Yeah.
No, but that's exactly what I'm referring to. Is like, can I understand what you're doing by having an intuitive insight? Can I, can we talk about the same things? I mean, you gave the example, for example, that we are part of this dialogue, and is it you and me talking with each other, or is it us talking, and there's no difference because we are both part of the same dialogue?
Yeah, and the more I listen to it, the more I resonate with it, and that's interesting. I don't know if I told you, but I sing in a men's choir or in a quartet, and when
the times when I'm singing and where at the same times when I'm listening at most, that is where the harmonies are. If I don't listen to the rest of the song, the other people singing, I don't know if you know about men's choir, but the idea is that you have you don't sing the same what is called it's the same song in some sense, but it's not the same melody. Oh yeah, never mind. I don't know what it's called. Stämma in Swedish. Key maybe.
The key, yeah, okay.
Maybe the key is the same, but it's the ones who knows about choir, men's choir, you know what I'm talking about. The thing is, I have to
You sing in different octaves, right? This is
more or less. Yeah, you can say that maybe. But the thing is that when you do that, you need to listen, because otherwise you don't find the harmonies. And you also have to be listening so much so you know, maybe not consciously, but more unconsciously, I say, when you have to be the lead. So the lead is shifting. Very often one maybe has the lead, but very often the lead is shifting in between those four people. And you really have to listen to be able to find the harmonies. And the tonality, is it loud or is it a little bit gentle? Is it like, the best music is when the harmonies are bearing the song. I think it's the same with the dialogue, that when you really listen to it, you're into it. You're not a part, you are the dialogue, and the dialogue is you.
Yeah, you're really in sync, or I think
In harmony, I guess.
in harmony. You said last time that spirit, for example, means being in spirit. That's what I'm thinking of right now. It's like we're both connecting to something. Yeah, is it part of us? Are we part of it right now?
Or are we it?
Are we it? Yeah. I mean, everything happens at the same time.
Yeah, and a lot of descriptions we have is that we are part of something. You're part of an organization, you're part of society, you're part of whatever you're part of. That is taking, again, things apart. So can we find words that are not separating? Can we say that I am the dialogue and you are the dialogue? We're in the dialogue together. We are in an organization together. Then we're not parts of the organization. We are in the organization together. End of story. And I believe that finding those words or descriptions or creative words or whatever we say, call it, is right now crucial for mankind and for society. And we know that, again, we have those sustainable development goals, and Jakob Trollbeck was one who made those fantastical 17 signs, or 169 goals is actually what we have together, even if the 17 are the ones that are most communicated. A year ago he wrote an article which was about, we really made it people aware of those sustainable development goals. So it's like a lot of people have bought a gym card, but then he wrote, but no one is really going to the gym. So both me and a lot of people around us, we have been thinking of this. So we were 3 people here last autumn. It was me, a woman called Christina Diné, and a guy called Pontus Rystedt. We thought about, what if we could use intentional decisions here to find principles to reach the goals without, I mean, if we focus on one goal, it could be that we ruin the rest of them. Or when we focus on something, it's not just that everything else gets blurry, it's also, do I really contribute to that goal? How do I contribute? And is it even relevant to contribute to that goal? And if we use principles, we could complement the sustainable development goals. And then we came up with the idea, what if we take those 169 development goals, sustainable development goals, the SDGs, and look at the language of it. can we then sort them to the consciousness level in the intentional decisions model? The physical me, formal we, created together, and conscious united. So what we came up with was an idea that yes, it was possible. So first of all, we tried out for you who are following the YouTube stream, there is now a picture of those consciousness levels in intentional decision. And the idea was then, what if we find the words for each consciousness level, and then we sort the 169 goals into it. And the next picture I'm going to show is just a way of talking about it. These are the 70 main goals, so it's not actually down to every one of the 169. This is right now a transcription or some kind of not translation, more transcreative way of talking about how can we transform goals into consciousness level, because where we are is where we get the power from. So you said before, Jens, are there words that are relevant, more or less relevant in terms of consciousness level? Definitely. So for instance, here we have in the physical me, we have words of survival. And in the formal we have words like infrastructure, we have rational, analysis, and so on, analytical, efficient. And in creative together, we have cooperation, together. We also talk about heart, and inclusive society and stuff like that. And conscious united, then we have co-creation, learn together, full of insights, and stuff like that. So that means if we can use this idea, then by using the language of each consciousness level, we have a very powerful, we can call it tool for a while, or way of looking at it, or way of working, which transcribes and transcreates goals into principles.
I think it's really powerful because it gives a language that speaks to different worldviews, but it also looks at it from a holistic perspective, because all of them are needed
Definitely.
on certain levels.
And no one is to be left behind. So everyone can onboard this idea.
Yeah, and I really like it, and it reminds me actually of a couple of workshops that we have done together as well. Is can you put yourself in another worldview and look on your current tools, on your current way of doing things, and see more opportunities coming out of this? And the workshop I'm talking about is creating business in the new paradigm, which is basically where we have done exactly this. We have used some of the most used tools for business development, like the lean startup, business model canvas, a pitching tool, team development goals, SWOT, exactly. And we looked basically on it from a, I would say, consciously united perspective. And the definition didn't came actually from us. It was always created in the workshop itself by the participants. And they basically created lenses to look at these tools. And then we asked them, so what do you see? Do you see something that is redundant now? Do you see something that needs to be added here? And it was always interesting that people, whatever they saw, there was always something which, how can I say it? There was something that needed to be added.
Because changed, maybe in
changed,
terms of wordings.
And that what that really implies for me is that the tools we have are also created from a certain consciousness level, and that we use on a daily basis to create businesses, to design projects, to design whatever creation we are desiring to create. But then we can look at it from another worldview, from a maybe perhaps more complex worldview, and you can see that from this understanding things are missing, need to be changed, need to be added, need to maybe be only reformulated in the language. And I think that's a very powerful tool of translating different worldviews and then finding a common language yeah, and for
Yeah.
the benefit of the planet.
I do agree, and I also believe that when you do that kind of transformative workshops, you also get a new language in itself. You get aware of what the language you have creates. Every word, for instance, in SWOT, if we talk about strength and weaknesses, you don't have to think of it for long before you realize it's contextual. And as it is contextual, every strength can be a weakness and every weakness can be a strength, depending on the context. And also how you look at what is a strength. What is the fundamental assumption behind a strength or a weakness? I mean, a lot of people today, they are sorted out in our community by combinations of letters, ADHD or whatever it is. And that is just, for me at least, the lack of understanding or capability of the society to see those strengths.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and I mean, if we look into the school system, I don't know how it works in many other countries, but in Sweden, very often you talk about kids with special needs, and also kids with special abilities. So that means that there is, in a normal, what do you call that, standard curve. These are the what do you call it? Percentiles? Now what do you call it?
The extremes.
The extremes. But what if we would have looked at it like all kids have special needs and all kids have special abilities? That would frame it totally different. That would probably need a reinventing of school system.
Yeah.
So
And in some way we have to understand where we're coming from. If you have one defined norm of that everybody should be fitting in, and then there's someone who is maybe outside that definition, is the person the problem, or maybe is the design of the system the problem?
yeah, and a lot of people say that we have now organizations which makes people frustrated, or they hit the wall, or what do you call it? They work themselves exhausted, but I would say that's not the systems that is the problem, because they deliver what they are set to do. So as long as we use the language to create that kind of systems, this is what we get. This is the result again from such a system. It's nothing that you can blame the system for. It's us who have created the system. We need better words, we need new words, and we need to redefine them. So, what do you say? Should that be the end of the stories for today?
I was just thinking that's the perfect ending for it.
And thank you for being with us today. And please, if you want to support us, one way is to comment and share, of course, the material, and also please support us on Patreon. We have the Patreon account Best for the World. And if you're interested in those topics, don't hesitate to contact either of us. And thanks for now, and see you soon again. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We are creating the world we're now living in. We are competing in. We are repeating in. We are believing in. It's time for us to shift our mind from best in the world to best for the world. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. It creates a new world to mind a shift, intentionality, perceptuality, conceptuality. We are choosing to shift our mind to best for the world, best for our world. Make decisions decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional. Make decisions intentional, to take decisions intentional, making decisions intentional.